October, Elements of Abstraction. This month we're focusing on form. I want to point out that form is different from shape because form is three-dimensional and shape is only two-dimensional. But I also want to point out that when we study and talk about form, we want to tease away implied form from actual form. In the same way that within the category of texture, we had real texture and then we had implied or what seemed to be visually textural, but was actually faux, F-A-U-X, texture, fake texture. In that same sort of school of thought, we want to tease form that's really dimensional away from a drawing or a painting or some other version of artwork that has been created with a sense of perspective and form based on how the composition was handled. And so the images that I'm sharing with you right now are actually dimensional sculptural forms that exist in 3 dimensions. And I thought we would start with some classics. Here's one. We are probably all familiar with the sculptures that are popular in commercial settings. Those obviously represent form, and Jean Arp was a proponent of sculpture. Henry Moore, very famous British sculptor, did all kinds of really fantastic, abstract, very, very large, larger than human scale forms in brass and any number of other materials. Barbara Hepworth was not only inspired by Henry Moore, but also a little bit of his competition. And over the course of her career, she went from abstracting the human form and being very engaged with the human form into simplifying until what she did was distilled to the simple forms that you see here, which are also quite large. Sol LeWitt, this is a form sculpture made entirely of concrete blocks. And I don't know, I like this. I'd love to see this in in twilight at the end of a day, or perhaps even with the sunrise. I do not know where this is, but it's very magnificent. Martin Puryear, I believe also a British sculptor, and you can see that in this particular form he is exploring balance. And so those are a few of the artists who focused in their careers quite a bit on actual abstract sculpture. Eva Hesse, his life was cut short at the age of 34. This is a piece that is sculptural and represents form. I believe, if I remember correctly, this was very heavy cable that was wrapped and then covered with, I think, paper and layers of other materials and plaster in order to create this form that comes away from the background. So in a sense, it's sort of splitting the difference. It's two-dimensional in a sense, but it's also so three-dimensional because the discs come away from the background. And we're all very familiar, and most of us in love with Yayoi Kusama. And really, in a sense, not only the queen of polka dots, but the queen of form. And these installations that she creates are a wonderful combination of the 2D backgrounds and the three-dimensional forms, taken even further by the presence of the artist herself. Dale Chihuly, one more medium that lends itself delightfully to three-dimensional form in an abstract way. There are sculptures like this all over the world. There's one in the San Antonio Public Library. This one is in the Kew Garden in Great Britain. Vanessa Beecroft is an Italian contemporary artist who uses sculpture and performance art to challenge perception of gender in artistic discourse. She frequently uses the naked female form, and her series of sculptural female heads, which is what we're seeing here, is a literal nod to the issue of misrepresentation in that there is no single female experience. Sarah Lucas is a British artist. She uses plaster casts in suggestive poses to explore the power of the female figure. In an age of social media where selfhood is conflated with ideas of glorification and women's bodies are constantly on show, her work is an encouraging reprieve. I don't think of my pieces as shocking, she remarked about one exhibition. Other images people see every day are far more explicit. I find the thing that makes it shocking is people's own self-consciousness. Jen Stark was born in Miami, Florida in 1983, and many of these pieces are done or have been created by relatively young artists, which is kind of exciting. Her art is driven by her interest in sacred geometries, fractals, visual systems to simulate plant growth, evolution theory, infinity, and mimetic topographies. She follows in the heels of Yayoi Kusama, Saul LeWitt, Tom Friedman, and Andy Goldsworthy. And this is actually a piece that is 30 by 30 and is sandblasted and I think powder coated pieces of aluminum. Norma Minkowitz is a textile artist who has worked most of her career with amorphous forms of one kind or another that are sometimes a combination of crochet, but always incorporate beautiful color variations that are very subtle, as well as this sort of not really weaving and not really netting technique that she invented herself. And here's a close-up of that. And so we can see that form is not necessarily limited by material choice. I started with fairly classic examples of metal and brass and stone sculpture and glass, of course, with Chihuly. But there are lots of ways that textile artists can also work with and manipulate form. Laura Ford, born 1961, is a life-size moose made entirely from recycled and cast-off clothing. You may be familiar with Ruth Asawa. She died in 2013. She was an American sculptor working with wire in a variety of techniques, and her creations appeared all over the world, including at the Whitney Museum of American Art. She originally studied with Joseph Albers, who of course was a famous color theory educator and artist at the Black Mountain College. And she was very influenced by Mexican village people's traditions of making baskets from galvanized wire. By 1962, Asawa's three-dimensional line drawings, rooted in nature, geometry, and abstraction, were beginning to turn into these incredibly fluid and ethereal three-dimensional forms. Jan Haworth is an American who's lived in Great Britain most of her life. She studied at the Slade School of Art in London during the 1960s, and while she was studying there, comments from her teachers made it clear to her that women studying art were being judged by the way they looked, not by their art, and their art was not being taken seriously. This sexist attitude annoyed her and made her determined to be better than the male students. She shifted into working with textiles using the sewing skills she learned as a child from her mother, and she has said that textiles are a female language to which the male students don't have access. The use of cloth, thread, latex, and sequins led her to become a pioneer of soft sculpture. And this is a life-size soft sculpture. Jacob Hashimoto is a young Japanese artist, born in 1973, actually Japanese heritage, but born in the United States. And he simulates nature by creating paper, light, three-dimensional structures, drawing on his Japanese heritage, large-scale wall and ceiling installations, which he refers to as tapestries, made out of thousands of handcrafted paper and bamboo kites. His longtime fascination with the intersections of abstraction and landscape place his paper art in between pictorial qualities and organic forms, and gives the illusion of light, space, motion, like flying on a ship with paper sails or scrolling an analog video game. There are many, many more examples of the fabulous ways that artists use actual form in 3 dimensions. I hope these have ignited your interest and that you'll continue to Google and explore this fascinating aspect of abstraction. And do remember that the images I've shared with you have been used for educational purposes only, and that copyrights do exist on any number of them, and so they should not be shared. I look forward to seeing how you're inspired by this and what you decide to do with your study this month of October with form.